Hello, welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Red Note Radio Man. I'd like to remind everybody that Paranormal Palace is now Talk Now Radio. I've changed from a paranormal show only to a variety show. The idea is to cover a broader range of topics. Still going to be doing the same paranormal topics and just going to add everything else I could think of to the, mixing pot and see what kind of interesting blend I can come up with here. Also, I'd like to remind everybody, if you want to call in and ask questions, it's 832-632-7904. And joining me today is going to be Scott Roberts, and we're going to be talking about his book, The Secret History of the Reptilians. And you can learn more about him at www.intrepidmag.com. And actually, while we got him here tonight, I'm going to see if he's got any other conferences coming up or any other events as well. So, Scott, how are you doing today?
Hey, Royce, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I got to tell you, it's a pleasure to have you back on my show again. I always get a kick out of talking to you. I mean that in a good way. Are you still with me, Scott? Uh-oh, I think we lost him. Well, I show that he's... Oh, yeah, Skype's showing a problem with the call. Folks, if y'all bear with us, there seems to be something technical going on here. We're trying to reconnect right now. I also like to remind everybody that I will not be on the air live this Saturday at 1 o'clock because it's going to be my son's birthday.
There we go.
Okay, we got him back, folks. Hey, Scott, I don't know what happened to you there.
I don't either. I think you were talking, and then you went blank, and I'm not sure. It said I was connected, then it tried to reconnect me automatically, which never works on Skype, so...
Yeah, mine was showing the same thing, so I don't know if you're in disconnected or mine. I still had a signal, so who knows? Maybe Skype got funny.
It might have been me. Remember, I'm out here in the country. I'm not in the city.
Right yeah.
Now, so it could be our internet out here.
Anything's possible. But at any rate, I was just explaining to everybody that I would not be doing my show this Saturday. It's my son Royce's birthday, so I'm going to be taking the day off for his birthday. And I just before you disconnected was bringing you into this here, and I was mentioning that it's always enjoy having you. It's always a great conversation. You're always very interesting, and I'm glad to have you back.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back, Royce.
And I already mentioned the title of the book. Now, isn't this book kind of like a sequel to a prior book that you've already written about reptilians?
You could call it a sequel. In a sense, it's just a follow-up work. The first book came out last year, in February of 2012, which was The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. And this book is sort of a follow-up in that it follows the same train of thought. It follows the same theories. It talks about other life that was here on this planet. In other words, reptilians, and were they really here? Did they have an effect on us? The current line of thinking with reptilians, aliens, is that they had come from another star system. They had settled here on Earth. That they genetically created mankind as kind of a slave race, and that they lost battles to earthbound or terrestrial reptilian races, and they've interbred with us, that it's in our blood, it's in some people's blood, and that they're still here and they're still governing things from behind the scene, even behind the Illuminati, that they are governing this world. And so I start to get a little tongue-in-cheek with it and a little mawkish of it, because it plays so deeply and perfectly into mythology. And in essence, what you're seeing here is modern mythology being built out of ancient mythology. And it does not, I'm not saying they do not exist. I'm not saying that there is not something to this theorizing. But if you look at, you just put in a search on the internet for reptilian aliens and start reading the websites that come up, you will find out of the first 10, at least in the search I did almost a year ago when I was completing this book, you will find that all these search websites that come up all have the same story. Very little variation between them. They're all saying the same thing. They've all plagiarized either from each other or from some original source or some source point back there.
But they each have their own personal bias on it.
They all have their bias or their twist on it. Many times, many of the paragraphs all start the same way, say the same words. The problem with all of the sites, the collective of them, is that there are no source points given. There are no historical source points, no reference source points, no scientific source points. Now, by source points, I mean if you're reading a book and you see the little number that gives you a footnote and says, I drew this from such and such's book on the theory of X, Y, or Z. You don't find that in any of these. Nobody cites their information sources. And so you've got a ton of stories out there that talk about this reptilian race that came from the star system of Draco. And they came to this planet and they did X, Y, and Z, yet there's no way to verify that that actually happened. I would look at that and I'd say, you tell a compelling story. Could you tell me where you are citing your source? And many of these people will then give you a website that has the same story with no cited sources. Or they will tell you, well, I based it on Zecharia Sitchin's work, or I based it on David Icke's work, or I based it on so-and-so's work. And the problem with that is that many of these things, again, when you go that far, have problems with some of those authors, problems with some of their interpretations of languages, problems with some of their interpretation of events. What it really comes down to is, it's like if you ever saw the Jesse Ventura conspiracy theory video of his interview with David Icke. You can go find that.
I missed that one.
You can go to YouTube and find that. It's pretty compelling. Jesse pretty much does his, well, if there are reptilians, why don't you tell me where I can find one? and David Icke is like, well, it's not that easy. And this is the way that interview goes. And Jesse's saying, I'm just asking for a yes or no. Do they exist? And if they do, can you show one to me? How do I find them? Where do I find the proof of this? And David Icke goes back to, it starts getting to the metaphysical stuff. Now, mind you, anybody, I don't want to offend anybody. I used to say this for Judeo-Christian listeners. I don't want to dissuade anybody from their faith or offend anybody's faith when I'm speaking outside that box. Let me do the same thing with the metaphysical. I don't want to offend when I speak outside of that box of the metaphysical, because I definitely believe in a spiritual element to this universe and to our lives. But when you say my only proof point is in the spiritual realm, which is generally a veil that cannot be pierced, there is no way to prove them. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It means there's no way to verify it. There's no way to establish fact. And this is what I found with almost everybody, with David Icke. Not so much with Sitchin. I'll get into him. He's a different idea here. But all of these spiritual mentors out there that are putting down these theories of the reptilian race, they can only verify it with channeling or with spirituality or something like that. And that is, as I said in the beginning of the book, I think it was the introduction, my introduction, I said, proving the existence of a reptilian race that came here from another star system is about as easy as proving the existence of God. Now, does that mean I say that God doesn't exist because I can't prove his existence? No. It means I have no way to prove it. So we're going on faith.
Goes back to faith, yeah.
And that is the biggest problem with the reptilians. Now, I was on a radio show several weeks ago talking about this, and another host from their network called in. How can you say there's no proof? You can go to the internet. I could show you thousands pictures of reptilians, George W. Bush morphing into a reptilian, and so-and-so morphing into a reptilian, and Michael Jackson morphing into a reptilian.
Oh, David, I spend photoshopping.
And I told him, I said, I've been a Photoshop guru in my business since 1989. I've been working in Photoshop. I'm a digital artist alongside being a traditional artist. And I said, I could go into Photoshop and take a photo of you and make you look like a shape-shifting reptilian. I said, those photos don't prove anything. I said, find me those original photos in high resolution, and I will find you, no doubt, invariably, 99.9% out of 100 times, I will find you a fake. And he was taking me to task. He wasn't having that as an answer. And I am not a disbeliever in things, but I have come to the point where there is so much theorizing out there, so much notion building, so much religion building, so much faith-based, that I say, okay, I can take so much of that before I say, all right, you got to show me where you're getting your source material. You've got to prove your point. If you can't prove your point, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying you are automatically relegating yourself to the realm of having information that is not verifiable. Therefore, that information can only rely on anecdotal evidence, personal experience, spiritual experience, faith experience, whatever it might be. It's like I say about the Bible, this recent book I just finished with Dr. John Ward on Moses and the Exodus Reality, which comes out through my publisher, New Page Books, in October of this year. We explore the theories of Moses and the Exodus. And I say, archaeology will never prove that there is an existence, that God exists. I can prove that the history of the Bible, it can be accurate or plausible or reliable, but I cannot prove the existence of God by archaeology or historical data. Same thing applies to the reptilians, is that while there are theories of their existence, there's no way to prove they exist because there's no way to latch onto any kind of verifiable evidence. So this is where I get into talking about, you can be a big S skeptic. We may have talked about this on your show before.
I think we have.
I believe in two different kinds of skeptics, a big S skeptic and a little S skeptic. The big S skeptic is the one who says, no, it isn't. No, it doesn't. Nope, doesn't exist. And that's as far as their argument can go. Guys like Michael Shermer, guys like Dr. Dawkins, guys like people like this, the magnificent Randy, or amazing Randy, I guess it is. These are guys that are big S skeptics. The little S skeptic, a true skeptic, is a little S skeptic. He's the one who says, I find that I find that an implausible story, but show me the evidence, or maybe I can help you find the evidence, or I understand that there might be more to this story, but you got to show me something so I can move on with your theory. So I'm a small S skeptic, meaning I question everything. I question God. I question reptilians. I question Nephilim. I question Moses. I question history. But then I go and look for it. I go and try to find that answer. And that's what a small S skeptic does. A small S skeptic doesn't deny. Big S skeptics are denialists and cynics.
I'm kind of like you on that one.
There you go.
I tell everybody, I'd rather dwell in the realm of possibility and probability and shy away from the actual and the factual. Because when you start stating things as a fact, you get in trouble when you come to the area of proof.
That's exactly true. And it's like I love the words of Richard Feynman, and I know I use them a lot, and I've used them a lot in this quote in interviews that I do, and I quote him again in the book. Richard Feynman was a astrophysicist. He was a contemporary of Einstein and Oppenheimer, and I was listening to a lecture of his once, and he says there's a lot of things out there that I know a lot about. And he says, and there's a hell of a lot of things out there that I know very little about. And he says, for me, not knowing is the basis of how I think and how I operate. And he says, I would rather die not knowing than to die and find out that all the things I believed through my life weren't so. And so, same for me. There are certain things I'd rather not know when it comes down to it. Now, I want to know everything, but I'd rather not know if not knowing means I'm totally convinced of something that's wrong that I find out after I die that I've been wrong my whole life. And that's his point he was making. So I think with all of this stuff, there's something to it. Definitely something to it. But I have a problem when it becomes so dogmatic that it becomes nigh unto theological. And when you're talking religion and theology, that is what some of this turns into, religion building.
Yeah, I think you're about right on that one there. I mean, I've never interviewed David Icke, and I've seen his videos. I'm familiar with his work, and I don't want to talk bad about the man, but at the same time, to my way of thinking, what he's doing is religion building.
Yeah, I think he is. And now he wouldn't claim that, certainly, and he's got his own perspective on it. I think I know what the Jesse Ventura interview was getting at was that he's just out to dupe people for money, and that was Jesse's take on it, because he said this is what it looks like to him, is that if you have something that can't be proven and you're teaching a religion, religious type of thought, New Age type of thought, if you will. New Age is religious. Don't let anybody fool you about that. But when you've got people out there pushing something, an agenda like that, and pushing people to believe certain things, and there is no proof for it, that starts to look like, especially somebody like David Icke, who sells thousands of tickets to his events, thousands of copies of his books, and not hundreds of thousands of copies of his books. The guy is making pretty decent living off of this stuff, and I'm not going to be out there claiming that I think he's a fraud and just doing that. That was Jesse Ventura's claim. He says, if you can't prove it, if you can't give me any evidence, and you're going to keep preaching this like it's the truth, I think you're perpetuating fraud, and you're making money off of it.
Well, the one thing I would question on this here is, does David Icke believe the message that he's perpetrating, or perpetuating, should I say, or does he know that he's telling falsehoods? Because if he's innocently perpetuating it, whether it's true or false, it's not an intentional lie.
Right. If he really believes, I think he believes what he's saying, but I also think there are elements of what he does that he's really pushing the envelope. And all I can say is, without proof that he's actually lying, I would say he either truly believes his own story. He believes he's the Son of God. He's said that in the past.
Oh, God, so did Sherry Shriner, for that matter.
Right. When people start claiming themselves messiahs, I have a problem with that. I think he may have tried to use a more toned down version of the Son of God. We're all children of God, and I'm a son of God. He toned that down later. But I think that when you have people that push this nigh unto religious agenda behind their teachings, you've got to be very careful of them, because they're either very true believers or they are frauds looking to take you.
And I'd like to take a moment out, if you don't mind, Scott, to correct myself, because I just kind of set myself up with that bit about Sherry Shriner, because technically she don't claim to be the Messiah. She claims to be a direct descendant of King David. Which is, there's a difference between that and Messiah. It's just that, let's face it, the Messiah descended from King David.
Well, is it possible that she's a descendant of David? Sure. There's no way to DNA test that. Maybe she has a lineage that makes her believe she is a descendant of King David. Now, I know one of the messianic attributes after the time of David was that the Messiah would also be of the bloodline of David, of the house of David. And so, maybe she's making some claims there. I don't know exactly what she claims. But to say you're of the house of David, you'd have to, if you want to say that with evidence, show me the evidence. If you want to say, I am of the house of Ramses, there's no way to trace that. There's no way to know that for sure. Who knows if her claim is right or not?
Well, I know that I've studied the ancient mysteries quite a bit myself, and I've read Sitchin's work, I've read Von Daniken's work. I hate to tell you the amount of different people whose work I've read on this subject during my time. And one thing that I've noticed amongst all of it is throughout the ancient texts, to my knowledge, if you go back to the Sumerian text, the Egyptian papyrus, or wherever, you don't actually see, not unless you get into Native American Indians or like the Mayans, but you don't see these really big stories about the serpents. I think in Sri Lanka you do. But I'm just saying it's not a common theme, in other words. So people that's doing this, I think, probably got their lead from Lawrence Gardner before he passed away, because I think that's where it's got its start at when I first started seeing it.
And Lawrence Gardner would be a little more researched. I don't know that I agree with everything he's written, but he is somebody that has at least taken the time to write something out. One thing you will find in all of these fields are people who adhere in sycophantic type fashion to the people that they elevate as being the ones who have the right knowledge on something or have a corner of the truth on something. And they will spout that as if it is true evidence. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there is any true evidence that really links us back to reptilians or links or proves that there was a reptilian presence from another galaxy on this or another star system on this planet. There is no way to really prove that, albeit there may be tons of little bits and pieces of evidence that don't really prove the case, but might show that it exists. It's like saying it's like this. If you look at paranormal investigation, if I say I have all kinds of EVPs of ghost voices, or I have pictures of a ghost that materialize, or there are orbs floating over our Thanksgiving dinner, and that was great grandma coming to visit, or something like that. If you can look at all that stuff, that you might have caught some anomalies, you might have caught something that is really, truly spectacular. I have had my own experiences with voices, with unless anybody think I'm nuts, I mean voices that have audibly talked to me through equipment. I've seen ghosts materialize. I've had experiences. But for me to call them a ghost, or anybody else to say, I have evidence that there are ghosts, that's the hard part. Because we don't know what they are. We don't know what we're experiencing. Same thing with all of this stuff. Use that as an illustration. There might be little bits and pieces of evidence, but we don't know what we've really got there. We don't know if we're dealing with something from another star system. You look at Laird Scranton's work with the Dogon, and the research and the study that had been done of the Dogon and some of their stories, we can say, how could they possibly know that? How could they possibly have drawn that ancient map of a star system looking back at us from another point of the galaxy? How could they have done that? Is that coincidence in dots? Is the patterns coincidence? What is it? So that kind of evidence, it makes you pause and ask the question, is there something more here? Is there more meat to this? And that's where I stand on a lot of these things. And I know we're not talking a lot specifically about the reptilians here, but in all of these things, reptilians included, these are the things that we have to weigh our evidence and find out, is our evidence truly evidence, or is it wishful thinking? And that's what we have to do with all of this. For me, most of the heavy weight of the evidence about reptilians lands on the spiritual side of the scale, the metaphysical side of the scale, the unprovable side of the scale. When you get so much of that evidence, you have to ask, is there something to it? Or you have to start asking, are people starting to see more and more reptilians and have this kind of stuff going on because they now know of all this information? This information's out there. It's talked about for decades. Is this why people are having this? But like my book subtitle says, The subtitle of The Secret History of the Reptilians is The Pervasive Presence of the Serpent Throughout Human History, Religion, and Alien Mythos. This has been going on for thousands of years in human history. The presence of the serpent. Now, does the presence of the serpent in religion, religious practice, in every single culture, does that prove that there was a reptilian race that came from another star system? No, it doesn't. But it does prove that we all had the same types of gods, the same types of spiritual figures, or earthbound figures that we looked to in our ancient past.
Same rule would apply to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, too, wouldn't it?
Well, exactly. That serpent in the Garden of Eden, there's an interesting story, and I talk about it in the Nephilim book, and I also talk about it again in this book because it's pertinent. And that is the linkages between the Genesis story of the Garden of Eden and the serpent in the garden and the Sumerian story of the Anunnaki and the breeding of humans as slave race and the deliverance. All of these things start to be linked up, and it seemed to me as I was going through all of these old stories, when I would read the Genesis story and then go back to the Sumerian account, it seemed that they were very similar. And my theory is that Moses, well, first of all, I believe he's a real man. I also believe I know who he was in Egyptian history. But Moses, when he wrote these stories down, keep in mind, he would have written the first 5 books of the Bible in the last 40 years of his life, which would have been during the post-Exodus days, when they're wandering in the wilderness, going to the Promised Land, wandering nomadically. But keep in mind, the first 80 years of his life, according to the biblical account, he lived to be 120, the first 80 years of his life were not spent as a worshiper of Yahweh or a Jehovah. The first 40 years he was Egyptian, thoroughly Egyptian. He was Israelite by blood, but he was thoroughly Egyptian. And he learned, as a crowned prince of Egypt, he learned the Egyptian language. Egyptian religion and the gods of Egypt. This is where he grew up. This is what he learned for the first 40 years of his life. I mean, look at yourself. If you're listening to this, look at your age and say, if I learned and was taught something for the first 40 years of my life, if you're 40 or older, you know how entrenching that kind of teaching can be. Well, then he flees Egypt, and he lives in the Sinai, married to the daughter of the pagan high priest there. He learns the Sinaitic religions, the Syrian religions, the Canaanite religions, of course, the Sumerian religions, the Babylonian religions. And he learns all of this stuff, and it isn't until his burning bush experience that he converts to Yahweh worship or Jehovah worship, because he didn't know who this guy was when he appears in this God. And he's converted and spends the next 40 years. Now, keep in mind, this is a guy, at his burning bush experience, he was the only one there. He was the only one who saw it. He was the only one who wrote about it. He's the only one who reported it. And this is what he was operating on when he went back to Egypt. And operating on this alone, this being his experience, his epiphany, his spiritual high peak in life, this is what he was going on. And whether or not the miracles that he experienced were true or not, that's another story altogether. There's no way to prove whether they were true or real other than inside a faith box. But the whole point I am making with this is that when Moses wrote down the stories of creation, the Garden of Eden, the flood stories, he was hailing back to other religions. He was building the Jewish religion, Judaism, on the coattails of other religious stories, morphing them and making them his own. And I use an example of this in my book, when Muhammad founded Islam. He was a wealthy son of a wealthy family, and there were all these splintered Arabic tribes, but there was no cohesiveness to them. And they all worshipped in Mecca, and they worshipped 360 different gods. It was a polytheistic culture. And Muhammad had a mentor in a Christian man and in a Jewish man who said to him, if you want to unify the tribes, you need to start by imposing monotheism. do away with the polytheistic system. And so he did away with 359 of the gods at Mecca.
I also like to remind everybody that I will not be on the air live this Saturday at 1 o'clock because it's going to be my son's birthday.
There we go.
Okay, we got him back, folks. Hey, Scott, I don't know what happened to you there.
I don't either. I think you were talking, and then you went blank, and I'm not sure. It said I was connected, then it tried to reconnect me automatically, which never works on Skype. So.
Yeah, mine was showing the same thing, trying to so I don't know if you're in disconnected or mine. I still had a signal, so who knows? Maybe Skype got funny.
It might have been me. Remember, I'm out here in the country. I'm not in the city.
Right yeah.
So it could be our internet out here.
Anything's possible. But at any rate, I was just explaining to everybody that I would not be doing my show this Saturday. It's my son Royce's birthday, so I'm going to be taking the day off for his birthday. And I just before you disconnected was bringing you into this here, and I was mentioning that it's always enjoy having you. It's always a great conversation. You're always very interesting, and I'm glad to have you back.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back, Royce.
And I already mentioned the title of the book. Now, hello, welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Red Note Radio Man. I'd like to remind everybody that Paranormal Palace is now Talk Now Radio. I've changed from a paranormal show only to a variety show. The idea is to cover a broader range of topics. Still going to be doing the same paranormal topics and just going to add everything else I could think of to the, mixing pot and see what kind of interesting blend I can come up with here. Also, I'd like to remind everybody, if you want to call in and ask questions, it's 832-632-7904. And joining me today is going to be Scott Roberts, and we're going to be talking about his book, The Secret History of the Reptilians. And you can learn more about him at www.intrepidmag.com. And actually, while we got him here tonight, I'm going to see if he's got any other conferences coming up or any other events as well. So, Scott, how are you doing today?
Hey, Royce, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I got to tell you, it's a pleasure to have you back on my show again. I always get a kick out of talking to you. I mean that in a good way. Are you still with me, Scott? Uh-oh, I think we lost him. Well, I show that he's... Oh, yeah, Skype's showing a problem with the call. Folks, if y'all bear with us, there seems to be something technical going on here. We're trying to reconnect right now.